want to talk about the second interaction Big Frank has with a priest, and that is in Dream. And some of the conversations, they grow to be a little more airy than he would otherwise have in real life. He'll ask eventually, "What is the meaning of the universe?" straightly, and then
Well,
get
give me
kind
a
of like a
page number.
dream-like answer.
Give me a page number. What pages are we looking at?
Well, I can't
Oh,
recall the page
okay.
number, but this is just what I'm going off based on memory. And he makes some interesting asides in his dream, and then it kind of fools you in its structure, and it goes back to the present time. You think that he may be having this conversation with someone physical, and then it goes to the dream with the priest, and then onward from there. But it's interesting how you put the higher ideals in a dream sequence and then use the dream tropes, but still keep it within the realm of reality. And then when he awakens, he's still kind of pondering these things, and that's interesting of all of these characters. They are essentially their whole outlook on things is when they were born, and the universe began when they were born, as they said.
Yeah.
But there's a few characters like the Dan Schneider overvoice, like Manny Cole to some extent because he's aping Dan Schneider overvoice, that are able to get outside of when they were born, and their universe extends past that and before it.
Well, most people, accept their mortal limits. I do too, but you have to also try to get beyond them. And art is one of those things that gets you beyond these mortal limits. And most of these characters don't have that ability. They don't have the ideational foundations to conceive of these types of things. Life goes by. They drive. They go to a party. They do their job. They go to the bathroom. I've got several. I was just looking here on one of the pages. I have a scene where Tony Luft is taking a dump and his asshole gets particularly stained on the toilet. So you have those very human kind of moments. But most people don't get beyond them. Most people, I hate to think of it, but like this job that I'm just working now, the people I'm working with are very much philosophical zombies. That there's no deeper, there's no deeper self underneath themselves, and it's a kind of thing that can get very frustrating because. But in art, you have the ability to take a character who can't do that, and by focusing on that character's weakness and that character's inabilities, you actually display that someone else, whether it's the writer, whether it's the narrator, whether it's the reader, can have those moments. And those are those things where art comes to be an educational tool, but not in the overtly didactic way.
I would agree, but I would also like to point out too that it seems like they as you mentioned, they are kind of zombies even when they're working, when they're doing something like eating, if they're taking a shit, and then there's those few moments where they kind of activate themselves in these conversations that you have them in, like with Big Frank's conversation with the prostitute, where they'll be able to have some kind of insight into themselves, even if it's not in total. But for the most part, they just go along doing the same kind of things and not really thinking about them in any capacity.
Yeah, and that's what makes them real, and that's what makes them different and better than postmodern uh, characters who are just stereotypes. These characters will have these moments of these little islets, these little atolls of consciousness of something deeper. They are like Edwin Abbott Abbott's A Square, who gets hints of the greater reality. And occasionally, some of them, when they get bopped up off of Flatland, they are able to all of a sudden see things greater than even the sphere can, because they have this ability, they have this natal capacity, but it takes something in their life to jar them to float above the flatland of their life. Whereas someone like a sphere may have more, may have been born into a higher reality, but but his great seeming greater knowledge at the beginning of that book, for example, is just a happenstance of the fact that he was born a sphere and not a square. because A Square is actually the more enlightened individual. He just is living within his mortal limits until Sphere knocks him up above himself. But once they become sort of philosophical or intellectual equals, once they are able to both experience life above Flatland, it's clear that A Square knows more about reality than A Sphere, because he can all of a sudden things make sense to him. He starts intellectually putting pieces together that of things that A Sphere has never even thought of, because A Sphere, born into the higher realm, has no need to see beyond it. A Sphere can't conceive of a fourth dimension or a fifth dimension. Whereas for A Square, who is born in two dimensions, he's basically like, well, how can you not see that? If you lived in a third dimension and you could see me and stuck and trammeled in just two dimensions, how can you think that there's nothing beyond you? And in a similar way, you have to have most of your characters be A spheres, or the other ignorant polygons of Flatland. But you have to have an occasional A square, and occasionally an A sphere comes and bops them into something higher. And that character is the character that gives the in. And in that sense, when we talk about the final book, you could argue that Bit's acid trip into literature is Bit von Rheingold as A square.
It's as if an ant all of a sudden balloons into a human, and then because it's made such a jump, that it figures out how to get to the next stage of Superman or
Well,
something.
yeah, exactly. Imagine, and that's one of the things that you're going to see in the science fiction book is that the characters. The book is going to be called The Edge of the Shown, and the Shown are this alien race. Um, if you ever saw the film Forbidden Planet, there are going to be some overtones of the Krell, but these characters seem to have transcended time, space, matter, and energy. They don't even exist as energy beings. When you read most science fiction, these characters exist as energy. There's nothing. These shown, and the shown are going to be seen as characters who doubt the existence of the reality that we live in and which the characters in the book live in. To them, it's almost as if they're myths, that reality is a myth that they've made up, that they've transcended. They've forgotten that they came from that realm. And in a sense, they are A spheres, but they are A spheres who have the A square mindset in them. And so you have all these permutations that you can do, and what amazes me and how sterile and how bad most published fiction in all of human history is, but especially the last 40 years here in the West with postmodernism and multiculturalism and this me stuff. And it has not. And when I say that, I don't mean I'm not putting down black writers or women writers or gay writers or whatnot. I'm putting down all writers. Is how solipsistic, how obsessed with the self they are, and their characters and their stories and their whole fiction just is so flatlandish. And a book like this is so.
They've actually even extended down into maybe animalcules or something.
Yeah.
Instead of actually getting into even Flatland, they've descended from that.
Yeah, they're on Point Land.
Yes.